so much. Thanks, everyone. Don't mind us doing a little bit of spontaneous choreography here.
This feels better on the floor anyway.
That's great. Oh, perfect. Oh my gosh. Let me do that.
So I know we just got a quick bio about Mike's work, but I just also want to mention that the Center for Action and Contemplation, where Mike serves as the director of formation, has been so impactful in my life personally. Tim and I participated in the Living School, which is a curriculum by the Center for Action and Contemplation, and I just feel like they're living out this principle of gathering truth. They're really an interfaith organization, and I love this idea of receiving truth, let it come from whence it may, like Joseph Smith said, and that is what the CAC has been for me, just a touch point for wisdom traditions and faith traditions around the world that were unfamiliar to me, that have really rooted me in my own faith, but also been such a catalyst for translating that faith into meaningful work in the world. And so I have so much respect and love for Mike and the work that you're all doing at the CAC. So this is just such an honor to have you in person. So I'm really excited to get to do this with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks so much, folks, for letting us do this in a conversational format. I was so touched and honored beyond understanding when I was invited to come and be a part of this. And we had these great conversations, and folks referenced the Faith Matters podcast and said, gosh, we'd love for you to share some of what you talked about in that conversation. And what I had said, and everyone was so receptive to it, is the only way to replicate that is to do it in the context of a conversation. One of the mantras that we have at the Center for Action and Contemplation is that some things need to be explored and not explained, right? The heavier matters of life call for exploration and not explanation, for dialogue and not definition. The quest really is in the questions. And so it's thank you for agreeing to do this.
It was a bonus for me because it meant we got a little bit of extra time. I was thinking that maybe a really good place to start actually would be with something that Father Richard Rohr has written. He's the founder of the CAC in 1987. He's a Franciscan who has been such an influence for good in the world. Maybe you've heard Oprah mention him, or Brene Brown, or I'm pretty sure I've heard Bono actually.
Yeah, Bono references him 3 times in his memoir, which is crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, he's certainly impacted our life, and something that he wrote, I believe in Falling Upward, is this idea that all of us at some point will eventually bump up into something that exhausts our resources. It brings us to the very edge of what we are capable of handling with our willpower, with our knowledge, with our skill sets. We just get brought to this edge. And though that feels catastrophic in our own life, he writes that this is actually a pattern, that it's an expectation, and it can actually be a really healthy part of a spiritual journey. And so I think that for this conversation, it could be really useful to sort of start with that foundation. And so I wonder if you could orient us to this idea of descent, of disorder, of falling, and where that fits in this landscape of the journey of our lives.
Absolutely. Just real quick, just to set a little bit of context, and then we'll jump in. Has anyone heard of Father Richard Rohr? Great, perfect. If you haven't, he is a Franciscan friar. He is 83 years old. He started a place that I work at in Albuquerque, New Mexico, called the Center for Action and Contemplation. And what he was attempting to do with that center was to recognize that in a Christian context, folks who were doing action, who were doing work in the world, needed good spiritual practice to sustain them. They needed contemplation. And that good spiritual practice was always about putting our own personal healing and growth in the service of healing the world. So the center was founded in 1987. Father Richard was relatively well known. He was known as the tape priest back in the day because he did a lot of teachings on scripture, and they were on audio cassettes that circulated, and he sort of became popular. But what really, really put him on the map to become someone who is Bono's spiritual director, and Oprah's interviewed him 3 or 4 times, was he wrote a book called Falling Upward. And Falling Upward was tangentially about wisdom of the 2 halves of life. That's how he started talking about it. We start out in life with an idea he calls construction or order. We know what our life is supposed to be about. We put together good ideas of how to live a life. We live accordingly. And at a certain point, it might fall apart. He quotes the Trappist monk Thomas Merton, who says, "We spend our lives climbing a ladder only at a certain point to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall, and we've been climbing in the wrong direction." So that was the book that sort of launched him to public notoriety, and it is the beating heart of the wisdom of what we're talking about. Highly recommend. It's a great read. It's an easy but profound read, and I find it's one that folks of all different religious, spiritual, political orientations can jump right into. The most powerful statement in the book for me, I'm going to paraphrase a tiny bit, but the first half of what I'm about to say is a direct quote. Sooner or later, if we are on any kind of a classical spiritual schedule, we will fail at something, or something will fail us. It is an inevitability. And Richard's suggestion is this is actually something that is good for us. Because his modality for how we live our life is that we start in this sense of order. We're just looking for the rules and trustworthy guidelines, how to live a life. We construct a life that way. And then at a certain point, real life comes knocking, and it shakes up our system. And we realize it's just not quite that simple. But Richard says this is a good thing, actually, but a terrifying thing when we move into what he calls deconstruction or disorder. When suddenly the rules that we came up with for living a life, the principles that we were taught and handed, are incomplete, or at least the way that we understand them is incomplete. And then we step into what is one of the scariest seasons of our life, the deconstruction of the disorder, but also that is a tremendous opportunity to learn. The key insight from Richard and so many other teachers is that all the great spiritual traditions of the world, especially Christianity, have always known this, have attempted to give us wisdom to guide us through these moments of what some have called the path of descent, some have called disorder, some have called it the dark night of the soul, some have called it a midlife crisis, right? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, coined that term, and Richard draws on that pretty heavily. We're now realizing that in a complicated world where people are both living longer and facing challenging life situations sooner, the midlife crisis happens when it happens. Yeah, it's no longer a midlife thing. There's the quarter life crisis. There's the 6-month crisis. You know, it's a lot more common. But there is wisdom for us in how to navigate that season. I could literally talk about it for the rest of our time, but I'll stop because this is supposed to be a conversation.
This has been one of the principles that I think has been most nourishing in my own life, and I think specifically because I think I grew up believing that, bad things happen and you are going to experience grief and pain. But I think I also sorted tragedy and the things that could put you into this path of descent. I think I had like the clean version, the okay version, like the reasons that it's okay to mourn and suffer. And then I had this darker list, which were like things that are not acceptable, that you shouldn't experience. And so it was an easier leap to believe that if these things happen, if doubt happens, if if it's about our weaknesses in some way, then like this descent isn't allowed, or it's my own making or my own fault. It's really like there's this like morality that gets really tied up into it that makes me really want to resist the lessons that I might be more open to if it was something that I didn't bring on myself. And so I would love for you to, before we, I think, invite people to consider their own descent, like what are some of the life experiences, or maybe it's just deeply personal. What are the things that serve as invitations into these eras of disorder in our life?
I mean, there can, in general, yeah, there can be so many. That's what I love, the topic of this conversation, life transitions. Any life transition can invite us into this. I'm also a grief and trauma counselor by training. And the most shocking and important thing, I learned two things that I'll reflect on for the rest of my life in that training, and so many things that were so good, but the pivotal foundational components were, one, we can get to this later, or another topic for another day, grief and trauma are not the same thing and they need to be dealt with differently. Two, every single change in your life is a loss. Every single change requires conscious grief if we are going to live well. Living life means that we are constantly living and constantly dying. By the way, randomly, greetings from India. I was chatting with, my job is weird, and I've recorded something like 300 conversations with different spiritual teachers in the last 3 years for the work that I do. And I, for other reasons, was communicating at 5 a.m. this morning with Swami Padmanabha, who's a Hindu monk, and he's messaging me from India about adjusting something on a social media post, welcome to the 21st century. And I told him I'd be doing this morning and said, say a prayer for me. And so he's sending me these messages, and I hear animals and chanting in the background while he's talking to me about how to correct this social media post. And he says, this is such an important topic. Please tell everyone that when we go through difficulty in life, we are often aware that something in us is dying. Things around us are dying, and we have to consciously engage that and not confuse that for dying ourselves. And he said, tell everyone there that in Sanskrit, the word for eternal life is a combination of the word death and life, because in order to live, we have to be dying at all times. In order to be moving forward, we are constantly letting go of something to say yes to what today is giving us. So greetings from India. I've passed that on. I've done my due diligence. I'll pass that back to him. But all that to say, there are invitations every moment of every day. If you're sitting here listening to me talk and you're going, that's not what I expected. I didn't want to see someone who's dressed up like a pumpkin and sharing these things. That's a grief. I'm sorry. You need to grieve that and let that go so you can say yes to what we're doing. And so on and so forth. And it finds all of us in different ways. My story, I grew up as an evangelical Christian. My folks were pastors. They founded a large church. At one point, 4 of my 5 nuclear family members were clergy. My sister was the only one who had the good sense to not get into it. And and then I navigated through my folks' very public divorce. That was a wake-up call for me. I lost my brother to depression, which is why we're here, which is why I said yes. And then the 6-month anniversary of losing my brother, I lost my mother to cancer. That was a wake-up call. And yet we live in a culture and a society that's anchored in comparison. So while I can talk about my own journey with that, every single person in this room has something that might be nagging at their heart, and they say, well, that's not, how could I possibly think that's serious enough to grieve? There is no yardstick for loss and grief. All of it matters. All of it is sacred. All of it needs attention and presence and compassion. And what gets us is when we invalidate our own loss and grief, and we stop stepping into that process of eternal life that is calling us to let go and say yes. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling.
No, this is exactly where I was hoping that you would go, and I'd also love for you to talk about something else that I've learned from you, which is that our life is, every context of our life is so interconnected that if you lose your brother, you're going to start thinking about your relationship with God. And it's going to affect your self-esteem. And there's no context that is so isolated that the grief can just be there by itself. So would you talk about...
You want to talk about the GPS?
Yes, the
sure.
GPS.
So do we even use the term GPS anymore? It's Apple Maps, Google Maps, GPS, Global Positioning System. I remember when I got my first GPS app on my phone, I had to pay $80 for it because it was before they were being offered for free, and I was so thrilled that it would tell me where to go. we go through life constructing a GPS. We're constantly building a map for how to live. And so we have a meaning-making matrix that helps us navigate the world. And the way I think about it is it's a GPS. It's our ideas about God, our ideas about people, that's the P, and our ideas about our self, that's the S, GPS, God, people, and self. The thing that some of the Jungians talk about is that those three ideas are so deeply interconnected that if any one of them takes a hit, the other two suffer. So if I fail myself, if I let myself down, or if I'm told that I'm failing at being who I'm supposed to be, and I go into a crisis of self-esteem, I will also, knowingly or unknowingly, end up questioning my ideas about God and my ideas about people. If people in my faith community or my family let me down, and that causes me to question what I think about people in general and the safety of the society, of the world that I live in, if people fail to validate my identity or the difficulties that I'm going through, that will also cause a crisis of self-esteem and a crisis of faith. And if I start questioning about what I believe about God or my religious faith, there will be a crisis of self-esteem and a question about people that go with it, because they co-create each other at all the time. Does that make sense? So one of the things that as faith leaders and helpers we can miss if we're not careful is that a crisis in one of those areas will have ramifications for the other two. God, people, and self are fundamentally interconnected. And so these moments that shake up our certainty have ripple effects that cause us to question everything. Now, Father Richard, who talks about us going through seasons of life where we have order, everything is certain and makes sense, disorder, that falls apart a little bit, something fails us or we fail at something and we start asking hard questions. And then reorder. We put it back together, usually in a more flexible and open way. He's recently started talking about what he calls holy disorder, which is for people of faith when we recognize that God and the divine is at work in the disorder, that we have a choice in those moments to step into them on purpose. And what he said, which I internalized recently, is that love is always outgrowing the containers that it's put inside of. The nature of love is to expand, and as such, it is always outgrowing the containers we put it into. But that can be very, very scary when we find ourselves in uncharted territory or off the map. So I bought this GPS program in 2000, I don't know, 7 or something, before Apple Maps was a thing. And back then I lived in Manhattan, and New York City's always changing the grid that you live on, and the GPS had to keep up, and it was a private program. So it would very frequently throw me the wrong way down a one-way street because a year previously it had been going the other way. And I'd be driving down a one-way street, I said this in the podcast, and suddenly there's a garbage truck coming right at me, honking and flashing its lights, and there's nowhere to turn. And there is no deeper sense of betrayal than when your GPS steers you in the wrong direction. You're like, you had one job and I trusted you. It'd be fine if I got myself lost, but you have the answers and you got me lost. And we feel that in life too. Our GPS betrays us, and that is a loss, and that needs to be grieved. That might be I think the deepest loss. The deepest loss. I know when I lost my faith community, my brother, and then my mother, the deeper loss, if you can even imagine, was that the story that made my life make sense had failed me,
Thank you so much. I think this might be a good time to just pause and invite you, if you have something to write with, to just take a moment, and we'll pause for a couple of minutes and really consider in your own life what your path of descent has looked like, and maybe what some of those invitations are that you are noticing or have noticed in your own life that have taken you into this space of real disorder. Is there anything else you'd like
No,
to add that
I
we
think
consider?
that's great. I mean, this is great. Reflect on what is a moment in your life that you have failed at something or something has failed you and it caused you to think differently. If you're really struggling and it's I was in the 5 minutes or less takeout line and it didn't work out, then go with that. But chances are we all have something deeper than that.
And to put the introverts at ease, you're not going to have to share it with anyone. We'll have some conversation hopefully later, but this is really just for you and your own consideration. So don't feel like you need to sanitize to share with the room. This is really just to help you kind of have a foundation for the rest of this conversation too. So 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes.
You'd be surprised what you can write in 3 minutes. And if you don't have anything to write, reflect. Okay, folks, if you want to take about 30 seconds to either wrap it up or put a good pin in it, I would invite you later to come back and maybe journal a little more about that if it's helpful. And then, do you mind? So I work at a place called the Center for Action and Contemplation. So contemplation is a big part of what we do. So do you mind if I just put us in like a 30-second centering? Okay. And also, anything that doesn't feel good, don't do. And anything that doesn't sound right, just reject. It's okay. But I encourage everybody, if you're willing, just take a moment and go ahead and find your feet. You can feel them planted on the floor. Maybe give your toes a wiggle. Dig your heels down a little bit. Our feet work pretty hard. It's worth saying thank you once in a while. Go ahead and find your seat. It's planted in your chair. It's doing some hard work as well. It's holding you up right now. Just feel the anchor of your spine. Thank it for supporting you. It's a good moment to say thank you to everyone and everything that supports you and lets you be seated and stable here right now with all of us. We found our feet, we found our seat. Now we're going to go ahead and find our heartbeat. One of the oldest forms of Christian contemplative prayer that we have is described as sinking the mind into the heart and standing there with attention before God, open to whatever's there. So just sit with your heartbeat for a few minutes and notice and take note of whatever wants to be noticed. Last but not least, just take a moment. Anything that wants to be noticed, whether it's a thought, whether it's a sensation in your body, whether it's something that's bubbling up in your heart, just send it some compassion right now. If it's something that feels distracting, just let it know that you will come back to it later and give it the attention that it deserves. Give it a thank you. All right, now let's bring our attention back to each other. Thanks everyone for indulging and letting me do that as well.
Thank you for that. One of these things that came up for me is I was considering these experiences that I've had. I think a lot of my disorder has been around faith crisis in the last 10 or 15 years. And I think at the heart of that, it's really this garbage truck coming at you feeling that was especially disruptive. It was this feeling that my faith and my work should somehow protect me from something, and I thought it should protect me from doubt.
Yeah.
And I think also anytime something disturbs me, my reaction can be to get really busy. And I think that's because somewhere inside I still have this idea that if I work hard enough, I can earn peace.
Yeah.
And some kind of protection. Maybe I think I'm open to the, bad things happen to everybody, but I think some part of my brain still believes that I can earn not suffering. And so I know you've talked about this wildly successful church that your family was a part of growing up. And part of this was this idea of a prosperity gospel. And there is nothing more comforting than prosperity gospel when everything's going well.
Sure.
And I think there is nothing that will hollow you out faster than prosperity gospel when it breaks.
Yeah.
So.
Sure. Yeah. Does anyone know what the prosperity gospel is? Hands. Okay. So I grew up in the early heyday of that. So the big televangelist preachers with private jets and golden toilets and all that. That was my childhood. I don't live that way now, I assure you. But what's interesting is there's fundamental to that is this belief that if we just do and say the right things, that God will bless us, right? If you just do it right, everything's going to work out. You just got to figure out what the formula is and do it well. There's a teacher, scholar, but also a contemporary teacher that I respect a lot named Kate Bowler. And Kate actually did her doctoral dissertation on the prosperity gospel. And her insight, in the way that I interpret it, is that the prosperity gospel is a very particular interpretation of American culture. And regardless of what your religious faith tradition is, it's sort of the water you're swimming in all the time. And it's this idea of two things. One, you're almost about to have your best life right now. You just need to work a little harder. So you just need to, it's so close. You just need to join this gym. You just need to try this supplement. You're not overeating. Your cortisol's too high. You just need to take this right supplement. It'll sort of do this for you. You just need to get the right sleep hack. You just need to get the right life hack. You just need to get your attachment style figured out or learn your Enneagram number. But there's always this, if you can just do this one thing, everything will be great. And it's this close. But you just need to work a little harder and learn a little bit more. And there's a very fundamentally American, and I don't mean, idea or Western idea that if something we're not doing isn't working, we just need to do it harder and faster, and then it'll all be okay. Do a little more of the thing that's not working, and it'll be great. So this sort of learn the rules, live them properly, and everything will be okay is a subtle underlying narrative. And to go back to what Richard teaches, at some point for a lot of us that fails us. It gives us a box that we just can't fit into, no matter how many. Has anyone really tried to put yourself in a box, and no matter how hard you try, you just cannot make it fit? Love is always asking us to outgrow the boxes that we're put into. But that subtle narrative, the challenge is that the shadow of that is that if I am suffering, it's because I'm not doing it right. Like if the rules are just do this, say these prayers right, go to church, play along. God's given us instructions for living. If we follow those instructions for living, we'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise. And then if you're not healthy, wealthy, and wise, then you sort of turn and go, oh, what am I doing wrong? I clearly didn't pray hard enough. I didn't follow the rules that I was given. And the real danger of that is that for very, very understandable reasons, humans in community are afraid of suffering and loss. And when they see people suffering and in loss, they look for an easy reason for it. If you're suffering and I can find a reason for it, then I can protect myself from it. So if I can say, well, if you just would have prayed harder, if you would have had more faith, that wouldn't have happened to you, then what that does is that gives me a hack around it. Well, I'll just pray hard and then I'll be safe. And I say this as a member of a prominent family that told folks how to do the right things so that they would be blessed and happy and healthy the way that we were, because we were, in that context. Folks looked at us and we seemed happy and healthy, and everyone said, gosh, I want to do what they're doing. How do we get that? And we said, well, just do this. Read your Bible. You should. Pray. You should. Do these things. Read these books. Follow these rules, and your life will be great. And then it all blew up and fell apart. And then you experience the other side of it where folks are going, well, obviously you did something wrong to cause this, right? And if I can identify what you did wrong, then I can avoid that and protect myself. And Jesus talks about this in the Gospels. There's an oblique reference where he talks about a tower falling and killing some people. And he said, you all want to know what they did wrong to cause the tower to fall on them. What a colossal example of missing the point. Instead of saying, how do I stand with those folks, who lost family in the midst of it. I digress. Does that get at what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you. So how do you think about this tension that is coming up for me, which is that, but sometimes these things, these like principles and practices, they do seem protective, like if you are abstaining from drugs, you're not going to become addicted, it's easy to to connect these dots and say, but like in some sense they are protective. And so it is an easy leap to make that like sometimes suffering does come from our own vices. So like, how do you hold all of that? That it's not that we're earning a blessing, but also that what we do and how we live is going to affect our mental health and our connections and how do you hold all of that together?
Absolutely. Well, so every religious system that's ever existed has had some form of law or ethics or guideline that one of my favorite psychologists says they're there to help us learn to use the powers of the soul safely, right? That's born for difficulty. It's not, we don't learn all that to avoid the difficulty. We learn all that to go through the difficulty. And herein lies the challenge. Every religious system that's ever existed, especially the Christian system, gives us wisdom for navigating these moments of disorder, transition, and difficulty. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul, right? A term that now exists in the popular culture, and some folks don't even know about its Christian religious origin. It's not there to get us around it. It's there to help us go through it, because the wisdom is it's going to happen. And you can go through it. I told a story this morning. I was asking if I should tell this story or not. It came up in my memory. When I was going through my doctoral program, I was working at a theater in Manhattan at the time, and I was with my cohort. I was working in New York City, going to school in California. I don't recommend it, and a lot of airplanes at that point. And I was at a cohort gathering, and there was a student who wasn't normally with us, and he had clearly connected from another cohort, and so we were all hanging out one night, and we were getting to know this person. We were telling him about the work that we did, and we're going around a circle, and I'm gonna change the details to protect his privacy as much as I can. He was a professional. He was going through the doctoral program with us, and it got to me, and I said, "Oh, I work at a theater in Midtown Manhattan. We're in conversations to try to get spiritual and artistic communities in conversation with each other." And he's this very polished, professional-looking man, and he cracked at that moment, and he started crying. And he just looked at me, and he said, that work is so important. And then he said the thing we'd been waiting for all weekend is he said, "Let me tell you why I'm here with all of you and not with my cohort." And he said, "I had to miss our gathering for a funeral. And he told us this story that his partner's son was a very famous artist in a particular city, being vague, to protect folks' privacy. And that famous artist was partnered with another famous artist. And she had lost her life to depression. And he, just a few months before, had settled her affairs, had all the memorial services, honored her and celebrated her very publicly. And then when that was all taken care of, they'd lost him to depression as well. And he said, I've just come from that funeral, and it's the second funeral in so many weeks. And he said in traditional cultures, the artist goes into difficult places to bring messages back that the culture needs to hear, but they can get lost there. He said traditional cultures, they had shamans, and shamans were people who knew how to go in and find their way back again. And he said, but our spiritual leaders aren't shamans anymore. And he looked at me and said, we need shamans again. And I've been thinking about that for 17 years because it was just a few weeks later that I would lose my brother. And when you're in a program for Jungian psychology and comparative religions and someone talks about shamanism, they're not saying go find somewhere and be trained as a shaman. They're talking about the psychological movement behind it. And what he was saying was there was a time where we had scripts in every culture in the world for facing moments of doubt and difficulty and using spiritual resources not to shame people for going through them, but to help people go through and find their way out again. And the signifying mark of someone who was set apart to be a spiritual leader and a spiritual guide in those cultures was that they had faced their own darkness and difficulty and found their way in, and they had let their wounds turn into wisdom so they could turn around and companion other people when they went through. But it was not a running away from doubt and difficulty. It was a stepping into it and making space to hold it inside of ourselves. And then the interesting thing is when you've done that, the irony is you don't come out with programs. You don't say, this is what happened to me, and now I'm going to tell you what you should do. What you come out with is presence. What my mentor Mirabai Starr says is, you're not afraid of the grief, and you're willing to compassionately make space for someone else to hold it. Carl Jung gave a talk to a group of clergy and psychotherapists together, and he said, when we really, really do our work and we go through life, we start to realize that there are no easy answers. There's no formulas. We've all seen people make a great choice that results in disaster and make a terrible choice that propels them into their destiny. And he said at a certain point what we realize is it's all about companioning people with courage and help on a daring misadventure. And please put daring misadventure on my tombstone when I'm gone. Anyway, sorry for the detour, but that's been deep in my memory for the last almost 2 decades. And I wonder for all of us, what does it look like to be people who we don't think that we're not going to have moments of doubt and difficulty. We compassionately step into those spaces and then can hold space for others. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. It is so incredibly powerful that what we come back with is presence, not lessons and certainty and direction for everyone whose experience we think we understand. It's this almost like paradoxical just trust that it's okay to not know the answers, and that there is something so healing about being together in that experience. And I have totally experienced that with people, like that is so much more healing than getting really good advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know you have a fondness for Origin,
Sure,
and you have been my introduction to him. Could you talk about health bestowing wounds and just this idea that our experience is not a problem. It is actually what creates this capacity for healing
Sure.
inside us.
Absolutely. Origen of Alexandria was one of the most important early Christian teachers. And a lot of folks say that after Jesus and Paul, he was the most formative figure in Christian history, and not known for a while because there were certain things about his identity that the church didn't love, so they tried to erase him from history, and then in the last 200 years, he's come back to prominence. So he had this idea. He talked about, first of all, his philosophy was that this life is a classroom and a hospital, and we are here to learn and to heal, right? His idea of God was a teacher and a physician, and we are at all times students and patients who are transforming into teachers and physicians. So he has this beautiful phrase where he says that our wounds become health-bestowing wounds if we stay with them. And the way that I talk about this is that our wounds, yours are different than mine are different than yours. They set us out on our wandering. They set us out on our life path. Your path is different than mine. Everyone here has had a different wandering. Our wounds give us our wondering. Every single one of you have questions that are uniquely yours to ask and answer, to sit with. Jung says we inherit work unfinished handed to us by our parents, our grandparents, our distant ancestors, and the culture and the context around us, and just say, here you go, carry on. That's our work to do in the world. They set us out on our wondering. They lead us to our wisdom teachers. Thank the gods. Thank God that good teachers come along in our life. One of my mentors, I said, what's that old adage that when the student is ready, the teacher appears? What does that mean? And he said, usually it means your ego's been broken down enough that you're willing to listen and to learn, and then anyone can be your teacher. And you'll know the right teachers when they show up. Our wounds lead us to our wisdom. Your wisdom is different than mine, and then that leads us to our work in the world. Because the pain that you can feel is the pain that you can heal, right? The medicine that you find is your medicine to give in gentleness and humility, not yours to impose on others. Because again, the medicine that you need is different than the medicine that I need. And then what's beautiful about that is in the end, it leads us to wonder. You know, it leads us to just the joy and the gift of being alive, which sustains us in all things. So that's the sort of thing. But the important thing to remember is that's a lived reality that we have to experience and that we can share when the moment is right. It's not a bow that we put on suffering. You don't impose that on someone when they're not ready to hear it. Because medicine administered at the wrong time in the wrong way can be poison. Sometimes what we do is we just companion someone in the midst of their wound, trusting. We are unafraid to trust that their wounds will become health-bestowing wounds. Mirabai Starr, a mentor of mine who's done extensive grief work, says the starting point is not being afraid of other people's grief. Because we live in a culture that is afraid of fear and afraid of difficult emotions. And when fear becomes present, shame kicks in and we isolate. And I did an interview recently with a teacher, and they were saying how predators can smell fear and it triggers something. And the same is true for all of us. When we smell fear, it kicks us into autonomic responses in a particular way. And when you are trying to help someone and they sense that you are afraid of what they are going through, whether they realize it consciously or not, they will react to that and they will hide and isolate, and shame will come in. So it's deep work for us as helpers to learn not to be afraid of other people's suffering and doubt and difficulty. Does that resonate with anyone? Does that make sense? I hope I'm not just rambling nonsense. Great.
We're going to come back to that because I think we really need to spend some time there, but I want to just snag one thing that you said about this idea that our healing, there's no such thing as putting a bow on healing and it being complete, and I've thought a lot about that in grief, that you don't complete grief in any amount of time. It's just, and so, but at the same time, if we're thinking about order, disorder, reorder, reflexively put grief in the disorder season of our life. So I can see that there must be something that looks like reorder and grief. Like grief has to be part of this reorder season, but it feels like that's always, like grief always is painful, right? Is there so how do you do reorder with a grief that will never be finished?
It's a great question. How are we doing time-wise, too? I want to make sure I don't go, because I could talk about that literally for 2 hours, and I want to talk about it for 2 minutes. Moons ago, someone told me I should keep a gratitude journal, and I've done it, and it's great. Y'all should do it. It's fantastic. These days, I keep a gratitude and a grief journal. And every day that I remember to do it, I write one thing that I'm grieving and one thing that I'm grateful for, and I keep the two in tension. Because I think, Swami, if you're all willing to hear from my Hindu monk friend who messaged you all from India to say good morning this morning, I think he got it in that idea that, in the Sanskrit word for eternal life, death and life are combined. We are, in order to say yes to the reality of today, we are always letting go of what we thought it would be. It's a random sidebar, but my favorite spiritual teaching of all time comes from the Desert Fathers and Mothers who were early Christian thinkers. They have this principle they call apatheia. So it's A-P-A-T-H-E-A. It sounds like apathy, which is not caring. It's not. It's not caring about what doesn't matter, so you have more room to care about what does. These are folks who lived in the desert. Has anyone ever hiked in the desert? We're in Utah. I'm assuming the answer is yes for some of you. The first time I went hiking, I carried an 85-pound backpack into the wilderness because I didn't know any better. I had cans of soup, not add water. I had whole cans of soup, just open and eat. I had hardcover books with me. I was out for 5 days, so I brought 5 changes of clothing. I didn't know. And the trip nearly killed me, and I passed so many people on the trail, and they were like, hey, bro, every ounce counts. You got to get better at this. They were not wrong. So I think about these folks living in the desert and how they must have learned how important it is to be in touch with what you carry and what you leave behind, right? We learn what to care about, what to carry, and what to leave behind. And I think that is also true. And I've lost myself. How did I get on this? This is where we go. Grief. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a letting go and a picking up. Another meditation I practice often is I will sit with both my hands out, and I will imagine what I'm choosing to let go of every day, what I'm choosing to hold on to, what I'm choosing to give someone else to carry, and what I can only carry with others, what's too heavy to carry alone but I can't let go of. So all that to say, per your question, grief is the price of love, right? Grief is the inevitable act of loving and living. We need to be engaged in it at all times. And so I don't think grief, I think you nailed it in your question. Grief is not limited to disorder. Learning to live with grief is a gift of being alive. And grief teaches us so much, Grief gives us a lot of wisdom. There's and we need that, but we also need love. Love without wisdom gets murdered in the street. Wisdom without love dies old, cold, and alone. We need to put the two together. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay, let's come back to this question of fear. And in a room where we have so many leaders, so many faith leaders, I think this is probably something that everyone has had an experience with, and that's when you out of love want to be a healing influence for someone who is coming to you for help. And so the experience of wanting to be a healer and noticing that what they're bringing to you is bringing up a lot of fear in you, that can be just like this it can feel like panic. It can feel like panic to put your own woundedness aside and, focus and not be the one in need. Like you don't want your wounds to be center stage. But that shame and that fear is part of the conversation no matter what. So I would love to like really spend some time here. Like, what does it actually look like to be someone who can help while you're experiencing, you're having your own life experience, in the room, like you're processing your own wounds and your own fear and your own shame in real time. And at the same time, want so much to be an influence for good for this person across from you that you love and want to help.
Yeah, I think Jung wrote a letter to someone at some point. He was talking about American culture 100 years ago, right? And he said, you Americans, you're so noisy. You're constantly surrounding yourself with noise. He also said you're constantly surrounding yourself with time-saving devices that are taking all your time away. What's going on there? It was 100 years ago. Goodness gracious. But what he said is the reason we're paraphrased, but the reason we're surrounding ourselves with noise is because we're afraid of our own fear. And we don't want to pause and listen to it. I think so first of all, there's a great story in the Bible about this. And that is the story of Job, right? So Job is a good person who does everything right and then loses everything. He followed all the rules the right way. He was a wonderful, righteous person. And that does serve him well, because if you read all the story all the way to the end, at the very end of it, what ends up happening is his community comes together and everyone makes a small donation to him and it helps him get back on his feet. So it is like what goes around does come around in the story, but he's a good person who loses everything. And then a bunch of his friends, he loses everything he owns in his family. And a bunch of his friends travel and they sit with him quiet for, 5 days, 7 days. They sit Shiva, Jewish practice. They're grieving together. They're not talking. They're just sitting in the quiet. And then he finally breaks his silence and he says, I wish I'd never been born. I don't want to be alive, but what keeps me alive is I want God to tell me why this is happening. And they start to debate him. They basically say, well, this happened because, if you'd just been a more righteous person, it wouldn't have happened. Or they say, don't be negative, be positive. You need to stay positive and pray. And they start giving him reasons. And what you realize is that they are afraid of his suffering, and they're giving him reasons, but they're not telling him what he needs to hear. They're telling him what they need to think so they can protect themselves from his loss. And that is a reminder for every single one of us in the helping professions and in spiritual leadership, because no matter who you are, there are questions and difficulties that scare you. And so when someone else is holding something that scares you, the instinctive reaction is to quickly try to fix it, not to help them, but to protect yourself. And listen, we've all done it. We've all done it. The flip side of that is if you shame and blame yourself for that as a helper, you're gonna be in the same trouble. What's interesting in that story is at the very, very end, God shows up and God speaks, and God and Job have a conversation. And for years, theologians have wondered, why does it take God so long to answer Job? And what you realize is God was the only character in the story who stayed quiet to let him say everything he needed to say. God sat and listened and let him emote and express and grieve. For those of you, the 5 stages of grief, that's the bargaining stage where you just need to try on ideas and stories and it doesn't even make sense. That's an invitation, I think, for us to again, we talk about the fear, like, one, recognize the places that scare us so that when we step into the need to be with someone who's suffering and it triggers us, we know what that fear feels like. So we don't try to fix them to fix ourselves, but we can hold that compassionate, supportive presence. And then 2, know when we need to ask for help, whether it's the help of saying, 1, ooh, this is above my pay grade. I need I need to refer. God, we all need to refer to mental health professionals often, right? 2, oh, I'm triggered. I need to check in with my support system. That's a big one. Or 3, to be a compassionate presence that says to someone, we had a conversation this morning or last night with someone who shared a story where they years later looked back on a moment where someone had come to them in need, and they were just busy. They were doing things. They were like taking care of kids and trying to get somewhere and trying to get across the room, and someone had come to them in need, and they instinctively offered a quick answer and a quick fix. And it didn't help that person, and it caused that person to isolate and go away. And a decade later, they still recognize I should have been there. But even the ability to say to someone, this is important. I can see that you are going through something important. I don't have the time or bandwidth to talk to you right now, but I want to make space for this. When can we find another time? Because if we lie about our own humanity and our own limitations, people are going to sense it as well. Does that get it all about what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So, I love this. I love the idea of sitting Shiva. And I've never thought about God as that kind of character in Job's story. To me, God has been this like strangely absent and sometimes punishing and flippant. I love that way of seeing this story with Job. I guess I'm wondering though, in real time, when you're having this experience and someone is in that, maybe they're bargaining in front of you and they're I heard a Bishop Karen Olavito, the way she put it is that she has this ministry of, she calls it the ministry of vomit. Yeah. And it's just like she's there to just receive the bargaining and the anger and the sadness. And she sees that as part of her work, to metabolize it with her presence, to just receive. And I'm a talker, so maybe this is especially my problem, but it's so hard not to be like, yeah, and then, do it right back. So what is it? I would love to just know, I know you're a spiritual director, what does that look like in real conversation? What are the things that are going to come out of your mouth? What does it feel like to do that with someone? Is it literally silence? Is it, what is it? What could that feel like? Because I think this is a shift. This is not the way we do support usually. I think maybe this is just, it's American culture, the way you're saying, we're going to talk through our problems. We're going to talk through our worship. We're going to come to some sort of very heady solution. I think that's an easy impulse. So if you could just paint this other way, I think that could really be useful.
I think there's 10,000 ways to do it, right? Where each one of us is different. Each one of us has different wounds and different wisdom that we bring into the equation. I think, I have to say this, if God is real, which I believe God is, I think we sometimes think God needs more help than God actually does, right? We experience people's doubt and question, and we're like, I need to fix this. It's entirely possible that the creator of the universe can handle someone going through a season of doubt for a minute. It's possible. It's possible God's got it and is going to bring the person around. Maybe. You might not need to save God's credibility. We're not God's PR agents. 2, goodness gracious, some folks, some folks' silence goes a long way. There was a lot of, we were doing circle work at our organization for a long time, and we're like, be an absolute silent, affirming presence. And then we got some pushback where folks said, for some trauma survivors and culturally folks, silence it feels like erasure. So actually don't be silent. You learn. Questions though, my God, the value of a good question. The value of a good question. What does that feel like? Tell me more. And then also, again, this is different for everyone. Some people don't actually have the emotional dexterity for this, but there really is a space to go, what's helpful? Do you want me just to listen? Do you want me to converse back and forth with you about this? Some people will literally say to you, your faith leaders, they're going to say, what is the answer for this? But the last thing is, how do we in true honesty, and I don't know the answer to this one, how do we hold the tension of recognizing when we genuinely don't know the answer? We say to someone, I have that question too. I want to sit with you in it. In my journey, I've found that I trust more and more and more the spiritual teachers who lead me to good questions so much more than the folks who give me easy answers. And yet, talking about young people going through transitions, a certain degree of assurance helps. You know, I worked with a spiritual director for 13 years, and it was after I had suffered, 7 or 8 major deaths, and then lost my brother to suicide and lost my mother to brain cancer on the 6-month anniversary of losing him. I had 3 weeks notice that my mom was sick. Basically, we got a call. She went into the ER with a migraine. And then we got a call, and they said, if you want to talk to her, you got to get here today, because she's going to lose consciousness by the end of the night, which is what happened. And I walked into the hospital room to catch her in like her last 20 minutes of consciousness, really, literally. Walked into the hospital room, looked at her immediately. I knew she was going to die. Immediately. And I prayed the most honest prayer of my life, talking to God and saying, I don't have a thing to say to you right now. I just lost my brother, and I'm about to, out of nowhere, I'm about to lose my mother. She checked into the hospital with a migraine, and they said, well, it's obviously grief. She just lost her son. She'd had a CAT scan 6 months before, and there was nothing there. So I remember the most honest prayer of my life. Usually is, God, if you get me out of this, I'll never do this again. But there's that other prayer where I'm like, God, I don't have a thing to say to you, but I don't know how to do this without you, you know? And then a year or two later, I started working with a spiritual director. I think I've told you this story. And I showed up in her office the first day. She was great. She was a nun and a psychologist and a bunch of other things. And she said, why are you here? And I said, I'm being trained as a Jungian psychologist, and I'm a person of faith, and I'm studying all these world religions, and I need to figure out how to hold it together. And she said, great, tell me your life story. So I talked to her for about an hour. She let me talk for an hour and 15 minutes. And then I said, what do you think? And she said, I think you're not here for the reason you think you're here. And I said, oh, okay, tell me, oh wise one, why am I here? And she said, you just want to know why you've had so much loss in your life. You've had so much death, and you want to know why. And while I was opening my mouth to tell her that she was wrong, I started weeping. And then I thought, well, maybe she's onto something. And without thinking, I just blurted out and said, do you ever come back from this? And without hesitating, she said, yes. She said, in my experience, yes, the people I know who have suffered the most difficulty, if they stay with it, do come back from it, but you're never the same again. She said, encountering loss hollows out a big open space in your heart where you're going to feel your own sadness, but you're also going to feel the sadness of the world and all the people around you. So she said, you will be quick to tears for the rest of your life. But she said, what I've seen with those same people is that open space can also hold joy. It can hold love. So she said, you're going to be quick to laughter for the rest of your life as well. And she said, that's what I see. I was ready to hear that. She knew it was what I needed to hear at the moment, but she didn't tell me how. And she didn't tell me it would be easy. She did tell me, you can get through this. And that was what I needed to hear. She was an expert listener. She knew what to say. But she wasn't afraid of my fear. And she wasn't afraid of my loss.
Yeah, I think you're right that the animal in us really can smell when somebody is afraid for us, and also when there is complete trust that however deep we're going, we're gonna figure this out. Like that even without a single solution offered, that to me has been the most empowering. Just seeing and feeling this complete trust that I'm gonna be okay. I can figure it out. There's this principle at the Living School that I think is from James Finley. He says that the more we're listened to when we're not, or without being invaded or abandoned, the more we heal. And the more we heal, we become a healing presence in the world.
100%.
And that is the line in my mind all the time. Like, how can I be here without invading or abandoning? And I can feel whatever is unhealed in me is like a pinball inside, trying to do all of those things, like run away or fix it, run away or fix it. And that has been such a centering gift to just be here without leaning either way, just like receiving with openness. And there is healing that flows both ways, I think, when you have that interaction.
And it starts with us, that idea that we, 3 things James Finley says, every one of which is worth writing on a Post-it and putting on your bathroom mirror, right? 1, only love has the right to name who we are. 2, we heal in the presence of someone who will neither invade us nor abandon us. Because that's the way, in his teaching, that's the way God treats us. And sometimes you hear something and you just need to meditate on it for 20 years. So I've been on this one for 10. I got 10 more to go. Jim says, if we are absolutely grounded in the absolute love of God that protects us from nothing, but sustains us in all things, then we can touch the hurting places in ourselves and others with love. And I think that's an invitation for us as helpers to lean into sustaining as opposed to protecting, right? Be a sustaining presence as much as you can, again, if that's helpful. But again, I want to say this. When we are afraid of our own fear and when we are afraid of others' fear, that's when we close up and we can't be a sustaining presence. So the secret is not to get rid of your fear. That's not going to work. The secret is to be in dialogue with it, to befriend it as much as you can, and to get comfortable sitting with your own fear so that can help you sit with someone else's. And also, we recognize our limitations. Like real talk. I am a spiritual director. I sit with people in grief and trauma often. And the secret is not to be afraid of that. There are things that folks share with me that I can hold. And very often say, that's a good thing to talk to your therapist about. And they say, yes. I say, are you talking to someone? Are you getting help? I also recognize there's things I'm bad at. Real full disclosure. When I am companioning someone and they are staying in a toxic relationship and they choose to stay in it, I am the wrong companion because it triggers things in me and I go into fix and I have had to recognize, and again, that could be different for everyone in this room. There's some things that they touch wounds in me that are wires that are too alive. And I'm not helpful, and I can offer this much help. I can be a sustaining, listening presence, and that's when it's time to refer or ask for help. And if I could leave you with anything, as paradoxical as this sounds, I would ask everyone in this room. I mean, we could do it right now.
I was just going to ask. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. We have time?
We have a few more minutes, yeah.
We have a few minutes, yeah. I mean, one of the most valuable things you can do is to be honestly in touch with the things that scare you. There are some questions of faith, some challenges in life. It's okay to be honest about the things that scare you and are hard to companion someone else through, and own that. Would it be safe to invite people? Would it be safe to invite people to talk about that? Does that feel? Yeah? Let's do this. We've got about 10 minutes left. You've got these beautiful round tables. To the degree that you're comfortable,
the way I would put it is just, if you're open to sharing, what is coming up for you while you hear Mike talk about this. What are the experiences that you've already had where you notice that something is exploding inside of you when you're receiving someone's pain or experience? Are there questions that scare you, that you notice yourself having this impulse to avoid or abandon or invade or abandon? And then I would also love to hear when you've had those experiences with someone else receiving your pain and how that experience of trust and presence has affected your own healing. So we have maybe not quite 9 minutes. Let's see, only do like 6 minutes, and then we can kind of bring everybody
Yeah.
back together for a few minutes.
Yeah, to the degree that you're
close.
comfortable, anyone at the table, I mean, we're just giving you 6 minutes to share your deepest wounds with each other, so that should be fine. The thing that scares you the most, that's most vulnerable to share it with a stranger. But for those of you who feel courageous to say, this is a sticking point, go for it.
Like, this is just.
Anything you want us to touch on before we button it up and let y'all go?
I think you want to just wrap it up. So beautiful. I've loved it. It's been
Pleasure. And we sort of like that transition to, which is not something, the encouragement and the help of a leader is invaluable. To have someone who says, tell me about that, that sounds hard.
that's what you walk out of the room with. It doesn't even need to be
And I think what's interesting too is there's an invitation and passion for faith leaders, because if I'm taught that my leader is supposed to have the answer, it is terrifying when they don't. And if I'm taught as a leader I'm supposed to have the answer, sometimes that is the most terrifying thing, is, oh my God, I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for this person. What do I do? I'm supposed to have
And like
answers.
receiving it in real time. Like, gosh,
Yeah.
he's speaking
Yep.
the advice I'm supposed to give.
And the challenge is sometimes that we fake it. But it's interesting. We did this grief workshop on Saturday, the second one, right? Yep. Which were you? Okay. No, it's all good. It's all good. We have conversation is recorded, but we don't have the Q&R. And so there was a man. He stood up and he's crying. Everyone was crying. Everyone who asked the question was crying. And he says, Mirabai, it's been 25 years since I lost my daughter. And it's like it just happened yesterday. Happened to help me. And Mirabai says it's been 24 years for me. Yeah. And she said to him, what I can tell you is if you engage in these writing practices, yada, yada, it'll help. And I'm sitting there listening going, this is a dad. I love Mirabai. She's my mentor. She's like a mom to me. But I'm looking at this guy going, this guy's not going to go home and do the writing prompts. It's just he's the wrong person. Big, old, rough guy. So he then takes the microphone and he cries and he says, I've been telling myself for 16 years that I need to write her a letter, and I still haven't done it. I'm going to go home and write that letter now. And I was like, oh my God, she said the right thing. And I said to her later, I go, I totally thought that was a swing and a miss, that you were, giving him. And she goes, it didn't matter what I said to him. He just needed a validating presence who would stand with him in that moment. And that's when she said to me, you have to not be afraid of people's grief, and you need to be willing to step into it. And it just blew my mind. But I'll never forget that. That sort of just there's that great story in the book of Acts, right? Peter and John, guy asks them for money, and they're like, "Silver and gold have we none, but what we have we give to you," and then they heal him. But I think there is room also to say, like, this is what I have, and it may not be enough, but I'm here with you. Yeah, Viktor Frankl. Oh, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's Viktor Frankl tells a story. You know Viktor Frankl? Fantastic. He tells a story about a woman calling him in the middle of the night because she was struggling with suicidal ideation, and he talks to her. I think for like 3 hours. He talks for a long time, and at the end she's like, "I'm gonna be okay," and she says to him, "Nothing you said was actually helpful, but the fact that you were willing to have the conversation with me makes me think, that maybe it's worth being alive." And this is so, I love that story because I'm like, Viktor Frankl's my hero, right? His psychology inspires me, and I'm like, and he shared that. He's like, yeah, 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 it's good stuff. All right, we'll give them like one more minute, but encourage them to carry on the conversation. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, we do that. Sure. Yeah, I'm also realizing, I think today, looking at my text, I think this is just so meaningful. I think today is the anniversary of Mirabai's daughter's death. And I think it is. I'll know for a fact. Oh no, it's not today. Oh my God, it is today. Yeah, it's October 30th. Yeah. Yeah. Holy moly. Yeah, it's let's see. She passed away on 2001, October 30th, 2001. Oof, goodness gracious, what a wild day.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we've got a minute. We'll do this fast.
All right, we probably need to come back together. We will wrap up this conversation and your conversations. Thank you so much for sharing and just like for the warmth that's been in this room. I guess this means that people actually shared.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
please continue the conversations for the rest of the day if you feel comfortable. I'll tell this story quickly. One of my mentors is a woman named Mirabai Starr. She writes a lot about women's spirituality. She writes a lot about grief. 24 years ago today, her translation of The Dark Night of the Soul, which is my favorite, was published and came out. 24 years ago today, a box of books arrived on her doorstep. Talking about this translation that she did, it talked about how we go through moments of darkness and difficulty. 24 years ago today, when that box of books arrived on her doorstep, the police were on the doorstep telling her that her teenage daughter had been killed in a car accident. A few days ago, I was in a workshop with her on grief. And a gentleman stood up and asked a question. He said, "Mirabai, it's been 25 years since I lost my daughter. Were you there for this?" And he said, "It feels like yesterday. Help me." And she talked to him a little bit about it. And she does a whole program where she talks about writing grief. So she's like, "I'll tell you what we do." She said, and she talked to him about how to write about your grief. And I was watching this man cry and looking at this big, gruff sort of person. And I thought, I love Mirabai. She's my mentor, but this one's a swing and a miss. He's not going to go home and keep a gratitude and a grief journal. Nice try, and then he said to her, "Thank you. I've been meaning to write a letter to her for 16 years and I haven't done it. I'm going to go home and I'm going to do it now. And that broke me. And I said to her later, I said, I got to tell you, I really thought that was a swing and a miss. How in the world did you know that was what was the thing to say to him? And she said, Michael, it didn't matter what I said to him. What mattered was that I heard him and I saw him and I met him in his grief. That's what we need to do, is not be afraid of people's grief and be able to stand with them in it. And so on the 24-year anniversary of her loss, that's very meaningful to me. I think that's our time. What do you got?
That just feels like if there was one thing that we could distill this entire conversation into, I think that's the message that I'm keeping, and so I think that's the perfect place to end. Thank you so much for bringing your heart and your life experience and openness to help us recognize where we're called and how we can move in our own spheres of influence to be a healing presence in the world. We're really so grateful for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, folks. I encourage all of you, the deepest spiritual practice is deep listening, just companioning each other with courage and help on a daring misadventure. Thank you so much.